Imagine waking up one morning and deciding that the digital world is overrated. Maybe you're tired of screens. Maybe you no longer trust servers. Or maybe you just want to feel something real again, like the weight of responsibility or the crushing mass of 10 trillion sheets of paper. Whatever the reason, today you announce your plan. You're going to store the entire internet on paper. Yes, paper. The same stuff that panics when it sees a glass of water. Naturally, the first question is, how much paper are we talking about? Well, estimates for the size of the internet vary a lot, but a frequently cited ballpark is that the indexed web alone contains somewhere around 60 to 100 zettabytes of data. So imagine the internet isn't made of websites, videos, and memes, it's made of pizzas. Delicious, cheesy, I probably shouldn't eat this at 2 a.m. pizzas. Now, the indexed web, just the part search engines can actually see without melting down, contains around 60 to 100 zettabytes of data. What does that mean in pizza terms? Well, 1 zettabyte equals 1 trillion gigabytes. And if 1 gigabyte were 1 pizza, then 1 zettabyte would be 1 trillion pizzas. Now, multiply that by 60 to 100. You'd have 60 to 100 trillion pizzas. That's enough pizza to cover the entire surface of the Earth in layers about 200 meters, 650 feet deep, feed every human alive for the next several million years, immediately collapse civilization because every country would drown in mozzarella. Basically, the indexed internet is a giant, unstoppable cosmic pizza buffet, the kind where even the universe would look at the pile and say, yeah, man, that's too much. So you're essentially trying to take the world's largest digital buffet and mash it into a single, aggressively analog filing cabinet. Let's start small. Suppose you convert data into printed text. A single printed page, standard A4 or 8.5 by 11 inches, can hold about 500 words, or roughly 2 to 4 kilobytes depending on encoding. Yes, your heroic quest begins with the realization that a single sheet of paper can store approximately the same amount of data as a 1980s refrigerator magnet poetry set. You'll need a lot of them. A lot. If we take the low end, 60 zettabytes, and divide by about 3 kilobytes per page, you get approximately 20 quintillion pages. That's 20 quintillion pages. In metric terms, if you stacked that many sheets of paper, you'd create a tower about 1.6 times 10 to the 16 meters tall. That's 16 quadrillion kilometers, or about 10 quadrillion miles. In other words, your paper tower would casually extend well past the nearest star systems, wave hello to Proxima Centauri, and keep going until it ran out of universe to bump into. At this point, your project is looking less like document archiving and more like cosmic structural hazard. But maybe you want physical volume instead. A single sheet of 80 gram per meter squared office paper is roughly 0.1 millimeters thick, or 0.004 inches. Multiply that by 20 quintillion sheets, and you get a stack 2 trillion kilometers tall, or about 1.25 trillion miles. Still not super convenient for home storage unless you really, really hate your landlord. So maybe you try compressing the data. Paper can't do zip files, but you could print smaller text. Say you shrink everything by a factor of 10. Congratulations, you've now reduced the stack to a mere 200 quadrillion kilometers. Still longer than any commute in human history, but progress is progress. And then there's the weight issue. A typical ream of 500 sheets weighs 2.3 kilograms, or 5 pounds. That's roughly 0.0046 kilograms, or 0.01 pounds per sheet. Multiply that by 20 quintillion sheets, and you get 9.2 times 10 to the 16 kilograms, or roughly 2 times 10 to the 17th pounds. That's about 1/6 the mass of the moon, meaning your paper archive now qualifies as an object whose gravity would start noticeably pulling things toward it.
Birds might change flight paths. Local tides might shift slightly. Neighborhood cats would become slightly more elliptical over time. Nothing catastrophic, but undeniably awkward. And that's assuming you're printing text. Images make this even dumber. A high-resolution JPEG could require hundreds of pages of tiny encoded text. Videos would need millions. And then we get to YouTube. If you ever feel unproductive, just remember YouTube currently has over 800 million videos, and roughly 500 hours of new content are uploaded every single minute. That means while you're sitting here thinking about whether to microwave leftovers, YouTube just produced enough video to entertain or confuse an entire small nation. Try to watch it all? Impossible. Even if you watched 24/7 at normal speed, you'd fall behind by 720,000 hours every day. That's like trying to empty the ocean using a straw while the ocean keeps refilling itself with Minecraft tutorials. And the total size of all YouTube videos? No one knows for sure, but estimates go into multiple exabytes, enough data to give your hard drive an existential crisis.
What about storage space? If each sheet occupies about 0.065 liters or 0.0023 cubic feet when stacked with others, the full internet would need around 1.3 times 10 to the 18th liters of storage. That's 1.3 times 10 to the 15th cubic meters, or 4.6 times 10 to the 13th cubic feet. In other words, you'd need more storage space than every building on Earth combined. You'd need more space than all the oceans. You'd effectively need, well, another Earth, preferably one with a better filing system. And then there's time. Say your printer operates nonstop at 30 pages per minute. That's 43,200 pages per day, or 15.7 million per year. To finish the job, you would need roughly 1.27 quadrillion years. That's about 92,000 times the current age of the universe. Your printer would need to remain functional for so long that even atoms would start questioning their commitment to staying bound together. Now, let's be generous and ditch the sad little 30 pages per minute printer. Let's upgrade you to the fastest commercial printer on the planet, a monster that blasts out 100,000 pages per minute. It doesn't print, it fire hoses paper. At full speed, that's 100,000 pages per minute, 144 million pages per day, 52.5 billion pages per year. Impressive until you realize you're trying to print the entire internet. Even with this industrial paper cannon, finishing the job would take around 7.6 million years. Your fastest printer alive would need to run longer than human civilization has existed, and long enough for future archaeologists to dig it up and say, yes, this is where it all went wrong. And if you want to make this nightmare reasonable, let's do the math. To finish in about 100 years, a long human lifetime, you'd need 7,600,000 years divided by 100 years, approximately 76,000 of these printers running nonstop. To finish in 10 years, you'd need 7,600,000 divided by 10, about 760,000 printers. To finish in one single year, you'd need 7,600,000 divided by 1, 7.6 million printers. So in acceptable terms, you're looking at tens of thousands to millions of the fastest printers on Earth, all screaming at full speed, all day, every day, just to dump the internet onto dead trees slightly faster than the universe loses patience. At that point, you're not running a print job anymore. You're running a very loud, very hot art installation about why this was a terrible idea.
Now, let's also consider the environmental cost. Producing one sheet of paper uses about 10 liters of water and emits around 5 grams of CO2. Multiply by 20 quintillion sheets, and you'd need roughly 200 quintillion liters of water. That's 200 quadrillion cubic meters, or enough to drain every lake and river on Earth thousands of times. Meanwhile, The CO2 emissions would be about 1 times 10 to the 17th kilograms, comparable to releasing a dense cloud of oops into the atmosphere the size of a small planet. The climate would not so much change as it would click into difficulty mode. And physically handling this archive would be complicated. Even if you somehow built an Earth-sized library, you'd need an indexing system. Something that lets you find the one sheet containing, for example, a recipe for guacamole or a 2007 forum argument about GPUs. The Dewey Decimal System was not designed for this. You'd need something more sophisticated, like a GPS-enabled forklift that can survive gravitational shear forces while navigating through a continent made entirely of paperwork. Let's say you actually manage to print everything and not accidentally create a miniature exoplanet. Now you have to maintain the archive. Paper decays, ink fades, temperature and humidity matter. A typical sheet might last 50 to 200 years in optimal conditions. After that, it yellows, crumbles, and fails to store even 2 kilobytes reliably. Considering your printing timeline is 92,000 times longer than the age of the universe, maintenance would become your full-time job, and your descendants' job, and eventually the job of whatever species evolves after humanity gets tired and leaves. And don't forget updates. The internet grows by an estimated 300 exabytes per year. That's 300 billion gigabytes, or roughly 100 trillion new pages annually. So even if you finish printing a complete version, your archive will be instantly obsolete, like a cosmic-scale Encyclopedia Britannica that's already out of date by the time you finish writing the preface. So you try to build a bigger archive. Faster printers, more people, more time, more forests. At some point, this stops being an information storage project and starts being an interplanetary lumber harvesting operation. You might need entire moons converted into tree farms. You'd probably end up with a bureaucratic nightmare spanning several worlds. Galactic empires fall for less. But the real challenge comes when you try to read anything. You'd need a retrieval system capable of handling trillions of shelves, each the size of mountain ranges, or mountain ranges made entirely of shelves. Walking from one end of your archive to the other could take millions of years, even at 5 kilometers per hour, or 3 miles per hour. By the time you found the recipe you were looking for, you would have forgotten why you were hungry in the first place. As for disaster recovery, a single spark would turn your archive into the most disappointing bonfire in the universe. A moderate breeze could redistribute your data across continents. A spilled coffee mug could erase several petabytes of knowledge. And termites, tiny, hungry, cellulose-loving termites, could become the greatest cybersecurity threat in history. In the end, printing the entire internet on paper isn't just impractical. It's physically, environmentally, gravitationally, temporally, and philosophically uncooperative. The project has so many failure points that the universe itself is seeming to quietly pull you aside and whispering, maybe don't. But if you insist on pursuing this idea, if you really want to reduce the world's knowledge into an incomprehensible stock of dead trees tall enough to poke nearby solar systems, there is one silver lining. When you finally finish, long after stars have cooled and galaxies have drifted apart, you'll have accomplished something truly unique. You'll be the proud owner of the heaviest, tallest, most impossible library ever conceived, and absolutely nobody will want to borrow a book. At least it won't be overdue.